Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable. Andrelax whispers. From the attic, I never believed in ghosts until I moved into the old Victorian on Maple Street. The real estate agent had called it a character property with historical charm, which I later realized was code for, "This house has secrets." It was late September when I first stepped through those doors, the air crisp with autumn and possibilities. The afternoon sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across hardwood floors worn smooth by generations. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, how right. That feeling wouldn't last. I'd been searching for a fresh start after my divorce was finalized. 15 years of marriage dissolved into property agreements and custody arrangements. My daughter, Emma, would stay with me every other weekend, which meant I needed enough space for both of us, but not so much that I'd feel swallowed by emptiness when she was gone. This house, with its 3 bedrooms, spacious kitchen, and secluded backyard, seemed perfect. The price was surprisingly reasonable, another warning sign I chose to ignore. The moving company unloaded my considerably downsized life into the house while I directed traffic, pointing out which furniture belonged in which room. By evening, I was alone among towers of cardboard boxes, a bottle of whiskey my only companion. I made a makeshift bed on the couch in the living room, too exhausted to assemble my bed frame. That first night passed without incident, the house settling around me with ordinary creaks and sighs. The next morning I began the process of transforming the empty shell into a home. I unpacked kitchenware first, then moved on to books and clothes. Emma would be visiting in 2 weeks, and I wanted everything perfect for her arrival. I'd promised her the largest of the 2 spare bedrooms, and I spent hours assembling furniture, hanging fairy lights, and arranging her stuffed animals, just the way she liked them. The days passed in a blur of domestic activity. I started my remote work again, setting up my laptop at the kitchen table until I could properly furnish the small room downstairs I'd designated as my office. Neighbors stopped by with welcome baskets and introductions. The Millers from across the street brought homemade bread. Mrs. Keswick, an elderly widow from next door, brought lemon bars and warnings. "You've bought the old Hammond place," she said, peering past me into the hallway. "It's been empty for nearly 3 years, you know." "I didn't," I admitted, inviting her in for coffee. "The agent just said the previous owners had relocated." Mrs. Keswick settled herself at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. "The Prescotts," she corrected. "They only lasted 8 months. Before them, it was the Hammonds for nearly 4 decades. Sad business, that." I asked what had happened, though part of me didn't want to know. Old Mr. Hammond died in his sleep. Natural causes, they said. His wife couldn't bear to stay afterward. Too many memories, I suppose. She finally took a sip of coffee. The attic was his domain. Had it converted into a study. Spent hours up there, especially in his later years. I nodded, making a mental note to check out the attic. I hadn't ventured up there yet, assuming it was just storage space. Our conversation drifted to more pleasant topics, but as Mrs. Keswick was leaving, she paused at the door. "If you hear things," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "it's just the house settling. These old places, they talk to themselves." I laughed it off, thanked her for the lemon bars, and spent the rest of the afternoon assembling my bed frame, pushing the odd comment from my mind. It was 3 days later when I first noticed the door to the attic. It wasn't hidden exactly, but tucked away at the end of the upstairs hallway, painted the same cream color as the walls. I might have missed it entirely if not for Mrs. Keswick's comment. A simple wooden door with an old-fashioned glass knob, slightly cloudy with age. It opened with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow staircase disappearing into darkness. I fumbled along the wall for a light switch and found one at the base of the stairs. A single bulb illuminated the way up, casting long shadows that seemed to reach down toward me. I ascended slowly, each step groaning beneath my weight as if protesting the intrusion. At the top, another switch controlled a hanging fixture that dimly lit the space. The attic stretched the length of the house, with sloped ceilings following the roofline. Half of it remained unfinished, filled with insulation and exposed beams. The other half had been converted into a study, just as Mrs. Keswick had said. Dark wood paneling lined the walls. Built-in bookshelves stood mostly empty save for a few forgotten volumes, and a large oak desk faced a small window overlooking the front yard. The air felt thick and undisturbed, as if I were the first person to breathe it in years. I explored the space, running my fingers over the desk's surface, collecting dust. A Persian rug, once vibrant but now faded, covered part of the wooden floor. I made a mental note to come back with cleaning supplies. The space had potential, perhaps as a reading room or a place to escape when I needed solitude. I checked the empty bookshelves and rifled through the desk drawers, finding nothing but a few paper clips and an ancient fountain pen. As I turned to leave, something changed in the air. A subtle shift in pressure, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and glanced back over my shoulder. The room remained still and empty, bathed in the weak light of the single bulb. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Goosebumps prickled along my arms despite the warm, stuffy air. I flicked off the light and descended quickly, shutting the door firmly behind me. That night I dreamed of the attic. In my dream, I sat at the oak desk writing with the antique fountain pen. The words flowed onto the page, but they weren't mine. I couldn't read them, yet I kept writing, my hand moving of its own accord. From somewhere behind me came the sound of breathing, slow, measured, patient. I wanted to turn and look, but found myself frozen in place, pen scratching across paper, heart pounding in my chest. I woke with a start just before dawn. Sheets tangled around my legs, the phantom sensation of the pen still between my fingers. I brushed the dream aside and focused on my morning routine. Coffee, shower, more unpacking. The realtor called to check how I was settling in, and I spent an hour on a video conference with my team at work. Normal life continued, and I almost forgot about the attic until later that afternoon, when I was upstairs organizing my closet. I heard it then for the first time, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from above. 3 taps, pause, 3 more taps. Then silence. I stood perfectly still, head tilted back, listening. Just as I convinced myself, I'd imagined it, the sound came again. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Curiosity overcame apprehension. I walked to the attic door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. I opened the door and climbed the stairs, flipping on the light as I went. The attic appeared exactly as I'd left it, empty and silent. The small window was closed and latched. No birds on the roof, no branches scraping against the house. No obvious explanation for the tapping. I crossed to the desk and sat in the chair, half expecting to feel some connection to my dream. The wood felt cool beneath my hands. Out of habit, I pulled open the middle drawer. It was empty as before, except for the fountain pen. I picked it up, examining the intricate design etched into its surface. Hammond, I read aloud, squinting at the tiny engraving. A personalized pen, undoubtedly belonging to the former owner. I returned it to the drawer and stood, scanning the room once more before heading downstairs. The rest of the day passed without incident. I finished unpacking the last of my books, ordered takeout for dinner, and fell asleep watching an old movie on my laptop. The dream didn't return, and I slept soundly until my alarm woke me the next morning. A week into my residence, I'd established a comfortable routine. The house no longer felt strange, and I'd grown accustomed to its various noises: the radiator's hiss, the refrigerator's hum, the subtle shifting of ancient timber. I hadn't heard the tapping again and had almost convinced myself it had been my imagination. Emma's first visit was approaching, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I'd finished setting up her room, stocked the kitchen with her favorite snacks, and planned activities for us. My ex-wife would be dropping her off Friday evening, and I counted down the days with growing excitement. Thursday night, I decided to tackle the attic. If it was going to be a usable space, it needed a thorough cleaning. I gathered supplies, vacuum, dusting cloths, wood polish, and headed upstairs. The door opened more easily this time, as if welcoming me back. I flipped on the light and ascended. Cleaning took longer than expected. Years of dust had accumulated in every corner, and the wood paneling required special attention to restore its luster. I worked methodically, starting from the far end and moving toward the stairs. The desk was my final task. I polished its surface until the wood gleamed, then turned my attention to the drawers. The middle drawer stuck slightly, requiring a firm tug. When it finally opened, I froze. Beside the fountain pen lay a small leather-bound notebook I was certain hadn't been there before. I picked it up, running my fingers over the cracked spine. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten text in a precise slanted script. My thoughts on the afterlife. Read the first line. By Edward Hammond, 1972. I should have put it back. Should have closed the drawer and walked away. Instead, I sat in the desk chair and began to read. Hammond's journal detailed his growing obsession with death and what might lie beyond. The entries started reasonably enough. Philosophical musings on mortality, references to various religious texts and scientific papers. But as I turned the pages, the tone shifted. Hammond wrote of experiments, of attempting to thin the veil between worlds, of hearing voices that whispered to him from the corners of the attic. They speak more clearly now, one entry read. They have been waiting for someone who can listen, who can help them cross back. My hands trembled slightly as I read on. The entries became increasingly erratic, the handwriting degrading into barely legible scrawls. Hammond described rituals performed at midnight, strange symbols drawn on the floorboards beneath the Persian rug, candles arranged in patterns to open the door. The final entry, dated just 3 days before his death according to Mrs. Keswick's timeline, contained only one sentence. They're coming through, and I can't stop them now. I closed the journal, my mouth dry. Rational thought insisted this was merely the ramblings of a lonely old man, perhaps suffering from dementia in his final days. Yet a deeper instinct, something primitive and alert, urged caution. I returned the journal to the drawer and stood, suddenly eager to leave the attic. As I reached for the light switch, the bulb flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in an instant, my breath fogging in the suddenly cold air. 3 taps from somewhere behind me. Pause. 3 more taps. I whirled around, heart pounding. The attic remained empty, the shadows in the corners deepening as the sun set outside the small window. Without waiting another moment, I hurried down the stairs, switching off the light and closing the door firmly behind me. That night, I dreamed again of writing at the desk. This time I could read the words flowing from the pen. Let me in, let me in, let me in. Over and over, page after page. The breathing behind me grew closer until I felt it on my neck, cold and unnatural. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I woke gasping for air, sheets soaked with sweat, the words "let me in" echoing in my mind. Friday arrived, and with it, Emma. Her presence filled the house with light and noise, driving away the unease that had been building in me. We baked cookies, watched movies, and played board games. I gave her a tour of the house, careful to avoid mentioning the attic. When she asked about the door at the end of the hall, I told her it was just storage space, nothing interesting. I didn't want her curiosity leading her up those stairs. Saturday morning, Emma woke me with excitement about exploring the backyard. We spent the day outside, enjoying the pleasant fall weather. I watched her collect colorful leaves and chase squirrels, grateful for the distraction from my troubling thoughts. That night, tired from our adventures, she fell asleep quickly. I sat in the living room with a book, though I found myself reading the same paragraph repeatedly, unable to focus. At precisely midnight, I heard it. 3 taps, not from the attic this time, but from Emma's room. I was on my feet instantly, book forgotten on the floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart in my throat. Her door stood partially open, exactly as I'd left it. I peered inside. Emma slept peacefully, one arm thrown over her stuffed elephant. Nothing seemed amiss. I was about to return downstairs when I noticed her closet door was open a few inches. I distinctly remembered closing it earlier. Moving quietly to avoid waking her, I crossed the room and shut the closet door, checking inside first to ease my irrational fear. Just clothes and toys, nothing unusual. As I turned back toward the bed, a floorboard creaked overhead. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the attic floor, directly above Emma's room. I stood frozen, listening to the steady pace. 4 steps, pause. 4 more steps. Back and forth like someone pacing. I kissed Emma's forehead and slipped out of her room, pulling the door almost closed behind me. The attic door awaited at the end of the hall, innocuous in the dim light. The footsteps continued overhead. I approached slowly, pulse racing. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. The door swung open before I touched it. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring up into darkness. The light switch under my fingers refused to work. The footsteps had stopped. Silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. "Hello?" I called softly, immediately, regretting the sound of my voice. No response came from the darkness above. I needed a flashlight, but they were in the kitchen drawer. I would have to go back downstairs, leaving Emma's room unattended. As I debated what to do, a soft thump sounded from the attic, like a book falling to the floor. Decision made, I closed the attic door and hurried downstairs for a flashlight, grabbing my phone as well. When I returned, flashlight in hand, I hesitated at the attic door. Part of me wanted to check on Emma again, to make sure she was still sleeping safely. Another part knew I needed to confront whatever was happening in the attic. I compromised by looking in on her quickly, still sound asleep, before approaching the attic once more. This time, when I opened the door, I immediately shone the flashlight up the stairs. Nothing moved in its beam. I began the ascent, each step creaking beneath my weight. At the top, I swept the flashlight across the room. Everything appeared normal. The desk stood undisturbed. The rug lay flat on the floor. The bookshelves remained mostly empty. I moved cautiously into the room, flashlight beam dancing across surfaces. Something glinted on the floor near the desk. I approached and found Hammond's fountain pen lying uncapped on the wooden boards, at least 3 feet from the desk. I was certain I'd returned it to the drawer. As I bent to retrieve it, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and the flashlight flickered weakly. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it, drifted from the darkest corner of the attic. Finally, I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through darkness, revealing nothing. "Who's there?" I demanded, voice steadier than I felt. Silence answered me, but the air seemed to thicken, pressure building in my ears. The flashlight dimmed further, its beam barely penetrating the gloom. From downstairs came a sound that turned my blood to ice. Emma's scream, high and terrified. I dropped the flashlight and ran, practically falling down the attic stairs in my haste. The hallway stretched impossibly long as I sprinted toward Emma's room, her cries spurring me forward. I burst through her door to find her sitting upright in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she sobbed as I gathered her into my arms. There was a man in my room. "It's okay, sweetheart," I soothed, scanning the room while keeping her face pressed against my shoulder. "It was just a bad dream." "No," she insisted, pulling back to look at me with tear-stained cheeks. "He was real. He stood right there." She pointed to the foot of her bed. "He was old and sad, and he said he needs help." My skin crawled. "What else did he say, Em?" She wiped her eyes with small fists. He said the others are coming through. That's what he said." The same phrase from Hammond's journal. I pulled Emma closer, mind racing. "It was just a nightmare, baby. I'm going to stay with you tonight, okay? Nothing can hurt you while I'm here." She nodded against my chest, her small body still trembling slightly. I lay beside her, arms protective, around her shoulders, and sang softly until her breathing deepened into sleep once more. I remained awake, watching shadows move across the ceiling as clouds passed over the moon outside, thinking of Hammond's journal and the whisper in the attic. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows and the blessed ordinariness of breakfast preparations. Emma seemed to have forgotten her nightmare, chattering about plans for the day as she ate cereal at the kitchen table. I made coffee and tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. Today was our last day together before her mother picked her up. I was determined to make it special. We visited a nearby park, fed ducks at the pond, and had ice cream despite the autumn chill. Emma's laughter was the perfect antidote to the dread that had been building in me since finding the journal. By the time we returned home in the late afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself that the events of the previous night had been the product of an overactive imagination, fueled by Hammond's disturbing writings. My ex-wife arrived promptly at 6. She remained civil but distant as Emma hugged me goodbye, promising to call during the week. I stood in the doorway waving until their car disappeared around the corner, then closed the door on the growing darkness outside. The house felt immediately different without Emma's presence, larger, emptier, the silence more pronounced. I heated leftovers for dinner and ate standing at the kitchen counter, unable to settle. The events of the previous night pressed at the edges of my mind, demanding attention. With Emma gone, I could no longer pretend nothing strange was happening. Needed to know more about Edward Hammond and his supposed experiments. After dinner, I took my laptop to the living room and began searching. Local newspaper archives yielded several mentions of Hammond, who had been a professor of philosophy at the nearby university. His obituary confirmed what Mrs. Keswick had told me. He died in his sleep at age 78, survived by his wife Margaret, who moved to Florida shortly after his death. Further searching revealed more interesting information. Hammond had published several papers on consciousness and metaphysics early in his career, but his later work veered toward the esoteric. His final published paper, Liminal Spaces and Consciousness Transfer, had been largely dismissed by the academic community as pseudoscientific speculation. I managed to find a digital copy of the paper through the university library's public access. Hammond proposed that certain locations could serve as thin points between dimensions, where consciousness could potentially transfer between planes of existence. Under specific conditions, he theorized, communication, or even physical manifestation might be possible. The paper included a complex methodology for identifying such locations and strengthening the connection through ritualistic actions. Hammond noted that older structures were more likely to develop these characteristics, especially spaces with a history of intense emotional experiences or deaths. I thought of the attic, of Hammond's decades spent working there, of his death in the house. Was it possible he'd turned his theoretical work into practical experimentation? The rational part of my mind rejected these thoughts as absurd. Ghosts weren't real. Dimensional portals existed only in science fiction. Yet I couldn't explain the whispers, the footsteps, the fountain pen moving on its own, and Emma. She'd seen something, someone delivering a message that echoed Hammond's final journal entry. I closed my laptop, rubbing tired eyes. The grandfather clock in the hallway, left by previous owners and too beautiful to remove, chimed 10 times. Not too late to visit Mrs. Keswick. Perhaps she knew more about Hammond than she'd initially shared. The night air carried a hint of frost as I crossed the yard to her house. Lights glowed behind curtained windows and smoke curled from the chimney. She answered my knock quickly as if she'd been expecting me. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The house smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. "You've got questions about Edward." I followed her to a cozy sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. She gestured for me to sit in an armchair while she lowered herself onto a floral sofa, arranging a knitted blanket over her knees. "How did you know?" I asked. "The look on your face," she replied, studying me with keen eyes that belied her age. "It's the same look they all get eventually, the Prescotts, the family before them. They came asking too." "Asking what, exactly?" "About the noises, the whispers, the feeling of being watched." She reached for a cup of tea on the side table, hands slightly trembling. "It always starts the same way." I leaned forward. "What does?" "What's happening in my house, Mrs. Keswick?" She sipped her tea before answering. Edward Hammond was a brilliant man, but troubled. After he retired from teaching, he became obsessed with his research. Something about consciousness surviving death. Margaret worried about him, told me he spent days at a time in that attic, barely eating or sleeping. "Did you know him well?" "As well as neighbors know each other after 30 years. We'd have dinner occasionally, exchange Christmas cards. Margaret was in my garden club." She set down her teacup with a soft clink. "After Edward died, Margaret couldn't stand to be in the house. Said it didn't feel empty, if you take my meaning." I nodded, understanding all too well. She sold to a young couple, the Andersons. They lasted almost 2 years. Then the Wilsons, just 6 months. The Prescotts, 8 months. Now you. She fixed me with a penetrating stare. "It's getting stronger. Whatever it is. Working faster." "What happened to those families? Why did they leave?" Mrs. Keswick looked away, gazing into the fire. "Different reasons," they said. "Job transfers, family emergencies. But they all left suddenly, and none of them would talk about what really happened. The Prescotts, though," she hesitated. "The night before they left, Mrs. Prescott came to me in hysterics. Said her husband hadn't been himself for weeks. That he'd spend hours in the attic, writing in a journal that wasn't his. That he spoke in a voice that didn't belong to him. Chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the autumn night. I thought of Hammond's journal, of the fountain pen lying on the floor, of the whisper in the darkness. "What should I do?" I asked, hearing the desperation in my own voice. Mrs. Keswick turned back to me, expression softening. "If you're smart, you'll sell the house and move on like the others did. If you stay..." She shook her head. "I don't know what will happen. No one stayed long enough to find out." I thanked her for the information and walked back to my house, mind churning with everything I'd learned. The sensible option was clear. Put the house on the market immediately and find somewhere new before whatever had driven out the previous owners turned its attention fully on me. But Emma's room was finally perfect. My office was set up. And, beneath my fear lurked a stubborn curiosity, a need to understand what Hammond had unleashed in the attic. I entered the darkened house and flicked on lights as I moved through rooms, banishing shadows. In the kitchen, I poured a generous measure of whiskey and carried it to the living room. As I sank onto the couch, a realization struck me. The house felt different. Not just quiet without Emma, but watchful, expectant. The grandfather clock struck 11, its chimes echoing through the house. 1 hour until midnight, the traditional witching hour, the time when, according to folklore, the veil between worlds grew thinnest. I thought of Hammond's paper, of his theory about liminal spaces and dimensional connections. I couldn't leave without knowing the truth. Setting down my glass, I went to the hall closet and found a flashlight with fresh batteries. From the kitchen, I grabbed salt, a traditional ward against spirits in multiple cultures. Feeling slightly foolish but unwilling to take chances, I put a small container of it in my pocket. At 11:45, I began the ascent to the second floor, each step measured and deliberate. The hallway stretched before me, the attic door waiting at its end. I'd left lights on throughout the house, but shadows still pooled in corners and flickered at the edges of my vision. The attic door swung open at my touch, as if welcoming my return. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I climbed, toward darkness. At the top, I swept my flashlight beam across the space, half expecting to find someone or something waiting for me. The attic appeared empty, the desk undisturbed, Hammond's fountain pen back in its drawer. I set the flashlight on the desk, its beam directed upward to create ambient light, and checked my watch. 11:53. I lowered myself into the desk chair, heart pounding in my chest. Hammond's journal lay in the middle drawer exactly where I'd left it. I placed it on the desk before me but didn't open it. Instead, I waited, watching the seconds tick by on my watch. At precisely midnight, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, as before, but instantly, plunging from comfortable to freezing in the span of a heartbeat. My breath clouded before me, and the flashlight dimmed to little more than a dull glow. The pressure changed as well, my ears popping painfully as if I'd descended too quickly in an airplane. "Edward Hammond," I said into the silence, voice steady despite my fear. "I know you're here." Nothing happened for several long moments. Then, so softly I almost missed it, came the response. "Not just Edward." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. The flashlight flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the walls. I gripped the arms of the chair, fighting the urge to flee. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What do you want?" "To come through." The voice grew stronger, a whisper becoming normal speech. "Hammond opened the door, but he failed us. Will you succeed where he could not?" The journal on the desk flipped open, pages turning rapidly as if caught in a strong wind. Though the air remained still, it stopped near the end at an entry I hadn't read before. "Read," commanded the voice. I leaned forward, squinting in the dim light. Hammond's handwriting filled the page, more controlled than in later entries I'd seen. "The ritual requires a conductor," I read aloud. "Someone to channel the energy to serve as beacon and anchor. I have prepared myself for this role, but fear my aging body may prove inadequate for the task. Should I fail, another must take my place. The door, once opened, cannot be easily closed. They will find a way through, with or without willing assistance." The journal slammed shut, causing me to jerk back in surprise. The flashlight stabilized somewhat, its beam strengthening enough to illuminate the center of the room. There, where moments before had been empty space, stood a figure. It was indistinct at first, a man-shaped collection of shadows and mist. As I watched, frozen in place, it solidified into the form of an elderly man in outdated clothing. A cardigan, sweater over a button-up shirt, slacks, leather loafers. His face was lined with age, white hair thinning on top, eyes deeply set and intense. Except for the fact that I could see the bookshelf through his semi-transparent form, he appeared as solid as any living person. "Edward Hammond," I whispered. Q. Figure inclined its head in acknowledgement. "You know who I am. You've read my work. Your theory about liminal spaces," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You were trying to prove it." "Not just prove it." Hammond's ghost drifted closer, and the temperature dropped further. "Utilize it. Harness it. Death need not be the end, you see. Consciousness can persist, can transfer, can return. You died in this house. A necessary sacrifice." His form flickered like a television with poor reception. My body was failing, but my work was incomplete. I needed to continue from the other side, to fully understand the mechanics of the transition, to ensure the door remained open. "The door to what?" Hammond's ghost smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "To the other place, where we wait, where we learn and grow stronger." He gestured around the attic. "This space exists in both worlds now, thanks to my efforts. A true liminal space, neither fully here nor there, a perfect conduit." My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing. The other families who lived here, the Andersons, the Wilsons, the Prescotts, what happened to them? They were unreceptive to our needs. Hammond drifted toward the desk. Some resisted more strongly than others. The husband in the last family, he showed promise at first, began to assist with the work, but his wife interfered. "Assist how?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "By allowing partial possession. Consciousness transfer requires a vessel, you see. The spiritual plane and physical plane must have conduits to connect properly." His form stabilized, becoming more solid. "But you're different. You've sought understanding from the beginning. You came looking for me tonight. You want to know the truth." I stood, putting the chair between us like a shield. "I want you out of my house. Whatever door you opened, close it. Leave my family alone." Hammond laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. "Too late for that. The process is too far advanced. Even now, others gather, waiting for their chance. I was merely the first, the scout. They are many." As if in confirmation of his words, the whispers started. Dozens of overlapping voices, too faint to distinguish words but unmistakably present, filling the attic with a susurrus like dry leaves blowing across pavement. The shadows in the corners deepened, shifted, took on vague humanoid shapes that wavered and dissolved before fully forming. "What do you want from me?" I asked, fighting to keep panic at bay. "To finish what I started." Hammond glided around the desk, stopping inches from where I stood. "To be the conduit, the vessel to help us return. And if I refuse?" His expression hardened. "We have ways of persuading. Your daughter, for instance. Children are naturally more receptive to our influence, more easily molded." White-hot rage cut through my fear. "You stay away from Emma. That depends entirely on you." Hammond's form began to fade, becoming transparent. "Consider my offer. We can share this knowledge, this power, or we can take what we need by less pleasant means. Either way, we are coming through. The only question is whether you suffer in the process." With those words, he vanished completely. The temperature gradually returned to normal. The flashlight's beam strengthened and the whispering voices faded to silence. I stood alone in the attic once more. The encounter so surreal I might have dismissed it as hallucination if not for Hammond's journal still lying on the desk, open to a page it hadn't been before. I approached cautiously and looked down. A detailed ritual was described involving symbols drawn in specific patterns, candles placed at cardinal points, and incantations to be spoken at midnight. The final component listed was willing blood from the conduit. A few drops spilled onto the central symbol to strengthen the connection and widen the portal. I slammed the journal closed and backed away. This was madness. I needed to leave to get away from this house and whatever Hammond had awakened within it. I turned toward the stairs, only to find my path blocked by the same shadowy figures I'd glimpsed earlier, more solid now, forms coalescing into distinct shapes, men and women from different eras, all with the same hungry expression. "Not yet," they whispered in unison. "You haven't decided." I reached into my pocket and withdrew the container of salt. Without hesitation, I flung its contents in a wide arc before me. The salt passed through the apparitions, but they recoiled nonetheless, their forms dispersing like smoke and wind. I took advantage of their momentary distraction to rush past, practically falling down the attic stairs in my haste to escape. In the hallway, I slammed the attic door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. My phone showed 12:47 a.m. Less than an hour had passed since I'd entered the attic, though it felt like an eternity. I needed to think, to plan. Hammond and his others weren't going to simply let me walk away. That much was clear. I spent the rest of the night researching, combing through websites about hauntings, possession, and liminal spaces. Most seemed like superstitious nonsense, but occasionally I found information that aligned with what Hammond had told me. According to several sources, spirits could indeed use portals, or thin places, to manifest in the physical world. These portals could be created or strengthened through ritual magic, especially in locations already predisposed to paranormal activity due to the streetlights outside my apartment cast long shadows across my ceiling. I've been watching them for hours now, their shapes shifting ever so slightly as cars pass by on the street below. It's been 37 days since Marcus Volk's funeral. 37 nights of almost peaceful sleep. Almost. The prosecutor said I could stop looking over my shoulder now, that the threat had been buried 6 feet under along with Volk's body. I want to believe her, but 20 years of paranoia doesn't simply vanish overnight. The wind whistles through the gap in my bedroom window, the one I've been meaning to fix for months now. It makes this low, mournful sound, almost like a voice calling from far away. I pull the blanket tighter around my shoulders and turn to face the wall. Tomorrow will be better, I tell myself. Tomorrow, I'll start believing I'm truly free. My testimony: put Volk away. 3 years ago, I watched from my delivery truck as he dragged a man into an alley and didn't come out until his sleeves were dark with something that wasn't shadow. When the police found me, I thought I was signing my own death certificate by talking. But they promised protection, a new start after the trial. And somehow, I survived. Even when Volk's associates made it clear what happened to witnesses in their world. The thing about Marcus Volk that the papers never captured was his eyes. Not cold like you'd expect from a man who'd taken so many lives, but eerily warm, like he was genuinely sorry about what he had to do to you. That's what made him such an effective enforcer. He'd look at you with those apologetic eyes right before he made you disappear. At the trial, he looked at me that same way when they led him out in handcuffs, like he was sorry about what was coming for me, like we had an appointment he was reluctantly going to have to keep. But now he's dead. Heart attack in his cell, just 3 months into his life sentence. And I'm still here, trying to convince myself that shadows are just shadows and the wind is just wind. I must have fallen asleep at some point because suddenly it's morning and the shadows are gone. I have a routine now. Coffee first, then check the locks, then scan the street from my window before leaving for work. My therapist says routines are good. They bring structure, normalcy, but she doesn't know that my routine isn't about structure. It's about survival. The coffee machine gurgles to life, filling my small kitchen with its familiar aroma. Outside, the world is moving on as it always does. People rushing to work, kids heading to school, all of them blissfully unaware of how fragile their sense of safety really is. One moment can change everything. I know that better than most. My new job at the bookstore is quiet. That's why I took it. No deliveries, no chance of witnessing something I shouldn't. Just me, the books, and the occasional customer who rarely makes eye contact. My boss, Eleanor, is in her 60s and doesn't ask questions about my past. She hired me on the spot when I said I could work any hours and didn't mind being alone in the store. Sometimes I think she suspects I'm running from something, but she's kind enough not to pry. "You look tired," she says as I shelve a new shipment of mystery novels. The irony isn't lost on me. "Didn't sleep well," I reply, trying to sound casual, like it's just one bad night, not part of a lifetime pattern. Those new pills not working? She keeps her eyes on the inventory list, giving me space even in conversation. "They work fine." A lie. I stopped taking them a week ago. They made the dreams too vivid, too real. Dreams where Marcus Volk sat at the edge of my bed, telling me how he'd found me. How death wasn't the barrier I thought it was. The day passes slowly. I help a young mother find children's books about dealing with nightmares. And I almost tell her that no book will help when the nightmares are real. But I don't. I smile and recommend something with bright colors and happy endings. By closing time, the familiar anxiety begins to creep in. The transition from the safety of work to the vulnerability of my journey home. I check the street twice before stepping, outside locking the bookstore carefully behind me. Eleanor offered to let me leave through the back once, but back alleys are where people like Volk do their work. I'll take my chances with the open street. My apartment is 15 blocks away. I walk briskly, keeping to well-lit areas even though it makes my route longer. The neighborhood has changed since I moved in under my new identity. New coffee shops, new faces, gentrification slowly washing away the grit of the past. Sometimes, I wonder if anyone from my old life would even recognize me now, with my dyed hair and glasses I don't need. Probably not, but Volk would. He had that gift, seeing through people's disguises. A car slows beside me and my heart rate doubles instantly. But it's just someone looking for parking. False alarm. My therapist has a name for this. Hypervigilance. A symptom of trauma. She says it will fade with time. I'm still waiting. My apartment building is old but secure. I nod to Mrs. Chambers in the lobby as I collect my mail, mostly junk and bills addressed to a name that still feels borrowed. The elevator is broken again, so I take the stairs, checking over my shoulder more out of habit than necessity. Inside my apartment, I go through my evening ritual. Check the locks, check the windows, draw the blinds, heat up whatever simple meal I've prepared for the week. Tonight it's pasta with sauce from a jar. I eat standing at my kitchen counter, watching the local news on my small TV. They never mention Volk anymore. His death was barely a footnote in the crime section. Former organized crime figure dies in prison. No mention of his victims, or of me. Just as well. After dinner I try to read. It's one of the few pleasures I've allowed myself in this new life. Tonight it's an old spy novel, Something predictable where you know the good guys will win in the end. But I can't focus. The words blur on the page, and I find myself reading the same paragraph over and over. It's the anniversary, I realize. Not of Volk's death, but of the day I saw him in that alley. 3 years exactly. Maybe that's why I couldn't sleep last night. Maybe that's why every sound in my apartment suddenly seems amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the bathroom faucet, the settling of the old building around me. I give up on reading and turn on the TV again, flipping channels until I find an old sitcom. Laugh tracks are comforting. They tell you when something is funny, when everything is okay. I fall asleep on the couch with the TV still on, the faces of fictional people with fictional problems washing over me in blue light. I dream of Folk that night. Not the nightmare where he's coming for me, but something worse. We're sitting in a cafe, like old friends meeting for coffee. He looks healthy, nothing like the gaunt figure from the trial or the corpse from the news photos leaked online. "You know why I'm here," he says, stirring his coffee. "You're dead," I tell him. "This is just a dream." He smiles, and it's that same apologetic smile. That's the thing about enforcers like me. The job doesn't end just because the heartbeat does. I try to stand up to walk away, but my legs won't move. Classic nightmare paralysis. I made a promise, he continues. Not just to my bosses, but to myself. No loose ends. No witnesses left to tell tales. He reaches across the table, his hand warm and solid as it wraps around mine. Not a ghost's touch at all. See you soon. I wake up gasping, the TV now showing infomercials in the dark. Just a dream. Just the anniversary playing tricks on my mind. I check my phone, 3:17 a.m. With shaking hands, I go through my apartment one more time. Lock secure. Windows closed. No one here but me and my fear. The next morning at work, I drop a stack of books when the door chimes. Eleanor gives me a concerned look but says nothing. I'm grateful for her silence, for the fact that she lets my hands shake as I pick up the scattered volumes. The customer is a middle-aged man buying a gardening book. Nothing threatening about him at all, and yet I can't meet his eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" Eleanor asks during my lunch break. We're alone in the store, eating sandwiches in the small break room. "Fine," I say automatically. "Just didn't sleep well." "You never sleep well," she points out. There's no judgment in her voice, just observation. I consider telling her. Not everything, never everything, but enough. About witnessing something I shouldn't have. About the trial. About how even though Folk is dead, I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. But the words stick in my throat. Saying it out loud might make it more real somehow. "Maybe you should take some time off," she suggests. "I can handle the store for a few days." I shake my head. Work helps. It's true. The routine, the quiet, the shelves of books where every story has an ending, it all helps keep me grounded. She doesn't push, and we finish our lunch in companionable silence. The afternoon brings more customers, a welcome distraction. I lose myself in recommendations and ring-ups in the gentle art of helping people find escape in words on a page. By closing time, the nightmare seems distant. Not gone, but manageable. That night, I cook an actual meal. Something with vegetables and effort. A small act of defiance against the fear. A way of telling myself that I'm living, not just surviving. I even open a bottle of wine, something I rarely do because I don't like the vulnerability of dulled senses. The dream doesn't return that night. Instead, I sleep deeply, dreamlessly. When I wake up, sunlight is streaming through my blinds, and for a moment, just a moment, I feel normal, like a person with a past they can speak about. a future they can plan for. The feeling lasts until I open my front door to get the newspaper and find a small, smooth stone on my welcome mat. Just a pebble, really, pale gray and ordinary, except for the fact that it hadn't been there when I came home yesterday. Except for the fact that Marcus Volk used to carry such stones in his pocket, a nervous habit. He'd roll them between his fingers when he was waiting for someone. I saw him do it in the courtroom over and over during my testimony. I pick up the stone with trembling fingers. It's cool to the touch, unremarkable in every way. Could be anything. Could be some kid in the building playing a game. Could be nothing at all. But my body knows before my mind catches up. The peace of the morning shatters, and the old fear comes rushing back. At work, I'm distracted. I shelve books in the wrong sections, miscalculate change, jump at the sound of the door. Eleanor watches me with increasing concern but keeps her distance. During my break, I search online for news about Volk, about his associates, about any prison breaks or strange occurrences. Nothing. Just the same old articles, the same confirmation of his death. Is someone bothering you? Eleanor asks as we close up. The question catches me off guard. What? No, why would you think that? She sighs, flipping through her large key ring. You keep looking over your shoulder more than usual, I mean. She finds the right key, locks the front door. If someone's giving you trouble, I know people who can help. For a wild moment, I consider the possibility that Eleanor has connections. That beneath her cardigan and reading glasses lies someone with a past as shadowy as mine. But then she smiles, and she's just Eleanor again. Kind, perceptive, but ordinary. It's nothing, I say. Old habits. She nods, but I can tell she doesn't believe me. Well, the offer stands. I thank her and head home, the stone heavy in my pocket. I should throw it away, drop it down a sewer grate, or toss it in the trash. But I don't. Evidence, I tell myself. If things escalate, I'll need proof. But the truth is, I keep it because it's tangible. A solid reminder that I'm not imagining things, that the danger might be real after all. At home, I place the stone on my kitchen counter and stare at it. A message without words. A reminder. I'm about to call my handler, the FBI agent assigned to my case after the trial, when my phone rings. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, heart pounding. No message is left. The call comes again an hour later. Again, no message. By the third call, my nerves are frayed to breaking. I answer, against all my better judgment. Silence on the line. Then breathing, not heavy or threatening, just someone somewhere inhaling and exhaling. Hello? My voice sounds small even to my own ears. The breathing continues for 3 more seconds, then the line goes dead. Sleep is impossible that night. I sit in my living room with the lights on, the stone on the coffee table in front of me. Around 2 a.m. I finally call my handler. Richards, he answers, voice thick with sleep. It's me, I say. I think someone found me. I can hear him sitting up, sheets rustling. What happened? I tell him about the stone, the phone calls. It sounds flimsy out loud, the fears of a paranoid mind. But Richards listens without interruption. Could be nothing, he says finally. Could be kids or wrong numbers. The stone might be coincidence. Or it could be them, I counter, Volk's people. Volk is dead, he reminds me, as if I could forget. And his organization has been in chaos since the trial. Most of his top guys are either locked up or disappeared. Someone's still out there, I insist. Richard sighs. Look, I can request increased patrols in your area. Maybe even get a patrol car to swing by your place a couple times a night. But without something more concrete, I know, I say, deflating. I sound crazy. Not crazy, just traumatized. It's normal after what you've been through. We talk for a few more minutes. He promises to make some calls, check if there's been any chatter about witnesses from the Folk case. It's not much, but it's something. After we hang up, I feel marginally better. Enough to try sleeping again. This time I dream of the alley, of watching from my delivery truck as Volk worked with methodical precision, his back to me as he bent over his victim. Of the moment he paused, sensing something, and turned his head slightly. Not enough to see me clearly, but enough to know someone was there, enough to plant the seed of his own downfall. I wake up sweating, sheets tangled around my legs. The digital clock reads 5:43 a.m., close enough to morning. I get up, make coffee, try to start my day as if everything is normal. But the stone still sits on my coffee table, a silent accusation. At work, Eleanor gives me space. She must sense my fraught nerves because she handles most of the customer interactions, leaving me to work in the back cataloging new arrivals. It's soothing work, rhythmic and predictable. For a few hours I almost forget to be afraid, but as closing time approaches, the anxiety returns. The thought of going home to an empty apartment, of waiting for another stone, another call, it's unbearable. When Eleanor mentions getting dinner, I surprise both of us by accepting. We go to a small Italian place a few blocks from the bookstore. Neutral territory, public enough to feel safe. Over pasta and house wine, Eleanor talks about books, her grandkids, the history of the neighborhood. Normal things. I listen, nod, ask appropriate questions, all while scanning the restaurant every few minutes. Just checking exits, faces, potential threats, old habits. You know, Eleanor says, twirling linguine around her fork. I had a stalker once, years ago after my divorce. I nearly choke on my wine. What? She nods, matter of fact. My ex couldn't accept it was over. Started showing up everywhere. My work, my grocery store, my sister's house. Left things on my doorstep. Called it all. Hours. What did you do? I asked, suddenly intensely interested. Documented everything. Kept a log of every incident, every call. Got a restraining order, which he promptly violated. She takes a sip of wine. Then my brother-in-law had a talk with him. A talk? She meets my eyes, and for a second I glimpse something hard beneath her grandmotherly exterior. A persuasive one. We finish dinner, and Eleanor insists on sharing a cab, making sure I get home safely. At my door, she hesitates. If you need a place to stay, my guest room is always open, she offers. I thank her but decline. Running wouldn't help. If someone has found me once, they can find me again. Better to face whatever's coming here, in familiar territory. Inside my apartment, nothing has changed. The stone is still on the coffee table. No signs of intrusion. I check my phone. No missed calls. The quiet is almost more unsettling than any overt threat. It feels like waiting, like the breath before the plunge. I decide to follow Eleanor's advice. Document everything. I find a notebook and write down the details. The stone appearing on my doorstep. The 3 calls from an unknown number. The silence on the line. I note the dates, the times. It's not much, but it's a start. As I write, a strange calm settles over me. This is actionable. This is something I can do besides wait and worry. If there's a pattern, I'll find it. If there's a threat, I'll identify it. It's the uncertainty that's been killing me more than any concrete danger. The next few days pass without incident. No more stones, no more calls. Richards checks in, tells me the patrols have seen nothing suspicious. I almost start to believe it was all in my head. A bad anniversary reaction. My trauma finding new ways to express itself. The stone sits on my coffee table, Less menacing now, more like a reminder of my own fragile psyche. Then, a week after finding the first stone, I come home to find another. This one is on my kitchen counter, inside my locked apartment. Dark, almost black with a smooth, worn surface, as if someone has been carrying it in their pocket for years, worrying it with their thumb. The implication is clear. They can get to me anywhere. The careful security of my building, my locks, my vigilance, all meaningless. I stand in my kitchen, key still in hand, and feel the world narrow to a pinpoint of terror. They've been in my home, touched my things, maybe watched me sleep. I don't. Call Richards this time. What would he do? Dust for prints that won't be there? Increase patrols that haven't helped? Instead, I call Eleanor. I need a place to stay, I tell her, voice steadier than I feel. Just for tonight. She doesn't ask questions, just gives me her address. I pack a small bag, clothes, toiletries, my documentation notebook. As I'm zipping it up, my phone rings. Unknown number again. This time I answer immediately. What do you want? I demand, fear giving way to desperate anger. A pause. Then, so faint I almost miss it. Hello, witness. The voice is distorted, barely audible, but something in its cadence, its measure, reminds me of Volk. Not his actual voice, I'd know that anywhere, but his rhythm, his presence. Before I can respond, the line goes dead. I grab my bag and the second stone, leaving the first behind. Outside, I hail a cab rather than waiting for the bus. The driver makes small talk about the weather, oblivious to my inner turmoil. I watch the side mirrors, the passing cars for any sign of being followed. Nothing stands out. Eleanor lives in a brownstone in a quieter part of town, the kind of neighborhood where people still know their neighbors, where communities form around, stoops and garden plots. She meets me at the door, face lined with concern but asking no questions as she shows me to the guest room. Tea? She offers, and I nod, grateful for the normality of it. We sit in her kitchen, warm mugs between us. Her house is like her, practical, welcoming, full of well-loved things. Books overflow from shelves, family photos crowd the walls. A safe place, a normal place. Do you want to talk about it? She asks finally. I place the black stone on the table between us. Someone put this in my apartment today, inside on my counter. They got past my lock somehow. Eleanor studies the stone without touching it. The same someone who left the first one? I think so, I say. They called too, said, "Hello, witness." She looks up sharply. Witness to what? And then it all comes out. Not in a rush, but in careful, measured sentences. About my old job as a delivery driver. About seeing Marcus Volk emerge from that alley with blood on his sleeve. About the trial, the protection program, the new identity. About Volk's death, and how it should have meant safety. Finally, Eleanor listens without interruption, her face giving nothing away. When I finish, she's quiet for a long moment. So you think someone from his organization found you? She says at last. Someone carrying on his work. It sounds paranoid when you say it out loud, I admit. No, she counters. It sounds like a reasonable concern for someone in your position. She picks up the stone, turns it over in her hand. Did you report this to your handler? The first one. He thought I was overreacting. And now I don't know what to think. I take a sip of tea, finding comfort in its warmth. Volk is dead. I saw the photos, read the reports. He died of a heart attack in his cell. People like Volk have long reaches, Eleanor says quietly. Even from the grave. I look at her curiously. There it is again. That hint that she knows more about this world than she should. But before I can ask, she stands up. "You should get some rest," she says. "We'll figure this out in the morning." I sleep better in Eleanor's guest room than I have in weeks. Something about the unfamiliar space, the distance from my own compromised apartment, allows me to truly rest. No dreams of folk, no shadows on the ceiling, just blessed darkness. In the morning, Eleanor makes pancakes. The normality of it is jarring, almost surreal after the fear of the previous days. We eat in companionable silence, the black stone sitting on the counter behind us like a malevolent paperweight. "You can stay as long as you need," Eleanor says as we clean up. "But eventually, you'll need to decide what to do. Run again or stand. You're ground." "Running didn't help last time," I point out. "They still found me." "Then maybe standing ground is the better option." She dries a plate slowly, thoughtfully. But not alone. I'm about to ask what she means when her doorbell rings. Eleanor frowns, not expecting anyone. She goes to answer it, and I move to the kitchen window, suddenly alert for any sign of threat. But it's just the mail carrier, needing a signature, for a package. "It's fine," Eleanor calls, sensing my tension. "Just a book I ordered." She returns to the kitchen with a small parcel and a stack of mail. As she sorts through it, something falls to the floor between us. A small, smooth stone, white this time like alabaster. Eleanor sees it the same moment I do. Our eyes meet and I see my own fear reflected in hers. "They followed me here," I whisper. "I led them straight to you." She picks up the stone, examines it closely. "This isn't about me," she says, but her voice lacks conviction. I grab my phone, ready to call Richards, but Eleanor stops me with a hand on my arm. "Wait," she says. "Let's think this through." "Think what through?" "They're watching us right now. They know I'm here. They might know about you helping me." "Yes," she agrees calmly. "And calling your handler hasn't helped before. We need another approach." "Like what?" She considers for a moment, the white stone rolling between her fingers, much like Volk used to do. "Information. We need to know who we're dealing with before we can fight back. And how do we get that?" A slight smile tugs at the corner of her mouth. "I told you I know people who can help. I think it's time you met one of them." Eleanor makes a phone call in the other room, speaking too quietly for me to hear. When she returns, she seems resolved, almost businesslike. "We're meeting someone this afternoon," she says. "An old friend who specializes in difficult situations." "What kind of friend?" I ask, skeptical. "The kind who doesn't appear in phone books," she replies. "Get your coat." We take a circuitous route to our destination, changing buses twice, walking several blocks in between. Eleanor moves with the confidence of someone who knows how to avoid being followed. Another piece of the puzzle that is this seemingly ordinary bookstore owner. Our destination turns out to be a small, nondescript office above a laundromat. The sign on the door reads, "Northeastern Security Consulting," but the dust on the nameplate suggests it doesn't get much foot traffic. Eleanor knocks in a specific pattern, and the door opens to reveal a man in his 50s. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that's been broken at least once. "Eleanor," he greets her warmly. "It's been too long." "James," she returns, accepting a brief hug. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice." James looks at me appraisingly. "This is your friend with the problem?" Eleanor nods. "Let's talk inside." The office beyond is sparse but functional. A desk, some filing cabinets, a small, sitting area with chairs that have seen better days. No personal photos, no diplomas on the walls. Nothing to indicate who James is or what Northeastern Security Consulting actually does. We sit, and Eleanor explains the situation, the stones, the calls, the break-in. James listens attentively, asking occasional clarifying questions. His eyes never leave my face, studying me with an intensity that's unsettling. "And you're certain it's connected to the Volk case?" he asks when she finishes. "What else could it be?" I respond. "The timing, the hello witness message, it has to be." James leans back in his chair. "The thing is, Volk's organization is pretty much defunct these days. His lieutenants either went to prison or scattered to the winds. There's no central structure left to order a hit on a witness. Then who's doing this?" "That's the interesting question." He drums his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "Could be someone acting independently. A former associate with a grudge, looking to make a name for themselves by finishing Volk's business. Or," Eleanor prompts, "or it could be something else entirely." James turns to his computer, typing rapidly. "The stones are curious, very specific, ritual almost. Volk carried stones like that," I explain. "Always had one in his pocket. Used to roll it between his fingers when he was thinking." James pauses mid-type. "Is that fact widely known?" "I don't think so. It wasn't in any of the news reports, just something I noticed during the trial." He nods, turning back to his screen. "Give me a little time with this. I need to make some calls, check some databases. In the meantime, stay here, it's secure." James disappears into a back room, leaving Eleanor and me alone. The silence between us is heavy with unasked questions. "How do you know him?" I finally ask. Eleanor smiles slightly. "James and I go way back. We were married briefly in another lifetime. He's not exactly what I pictured when you said you had a bookstore. People contain multitudes," she says simply. "James was a detective before he went private, specialized in organized crime. He knows this world better than most." "And you?" Her smile turns sad. "I know enough to recognize when someone's in trouble. Enough to know when to call James." Before I can press further, James returns, his expression grave. "I've got something," he says, sitting down across from us. "But you're not going to like it." "Tell me," I insist. "There's a rumor in certain circles, started about a month after Volk died. People saying he had made arrangements, a sort of insurance policy." "What kind of arrangements?" Eleanor asks. James hesitates. "The story goes that he paid someone a lot of money to be held in trust until his death, at which point this person would continue his work, tie up loose ends. An enforcer beyond the grave," I whisper, the title suddenly taking on new meaning. "Exactly." James nods. "A final act of revenge against anyone who crossed him. But that's just a rumor, right?" I look between them. "I mean, he can't actually reach out from death." "Of course not," James agrees. "But he could certainly set things in motion before he died. Money talks, and Volk had plenty hidden away. The kind of sums involved in these rumors could tempt anyone with the right skill set." "Do you have a name?" Eleanor asks. "For this supposed enforcer?" "No. No one seems to know who took the job. Just that someone did and that they started moving about a month ago. I think of the timing. Just over a month since Volk's death. 37 days when the stones started appearing." "So what do we do?" I ask, feeling the weight of this new information. "We set a trap," James says simply. "Draw them out, identify them, end this." "Using me as bait," I conclude. "Not alone," Eleanor interjects firmly. "Never alone." James outlines his plan. I'll return to my apartment, resume my normal routine. But the place will be wired, monitored. James has contacts who can install equipment, maintain surveillance. Eleanor will stay nearby, in a rented apartment across the street. James himself will coordinate from his office, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. It's risky. If this enforcer is as professional as they'd need to be for Volk to trust them, they might detect the surveillance. But doing nothing isn't an option either. Running would only delay the inevitable. Again, by evening the plan is in motion. James's contacts turn out to be two impassive men with military bearing who sweep my apartment for bugs before installing their own. Small cameras at strategic points, motion detectors, alarms that will alert both James and the police if triggered. They work quickly, efficiently, making the equipment virtually invisible to anyone who doesn't know where to look. Eleanor helps me settle back in, her presence a buffer against the fear that threatens to overwhelm me at being back in the compromised space. The stones, now 3 of them, sit in a row on my coffee table. White, black, gray. A message I can't quite decipher. "I'll be right across the street," Eleanor reminds me, pointing to the windows of the apartment James has arranged. "You'll never be out of sight." I nod, grateful but terrified. What if this doesn't work? What if they realize it's a trap? "Then we try something else," she says firmly. We don't give up. After Eleanor leaves, the apartment feels emptier than ever. I go through my normal evening routine under the watchful eye of hidden cameras, dinner, television, a book I can't focus on. All the while, my senses are heightened to every creak of the building, every shadow that passes my window. My phone rings at 9:17 p.m. Unknown number. I answer, as agreed in the plan. "Hello?" My voice shakes despite my best efforts. Silence. Then breathing. Just like before. I wait, counting the seconds. Then, that same whispered voice. "Did you really think he would let you go?" "Who is this?" I demand, trying to keep them on the line longer, as James instructed. "An appointment. Keeper," the voice replies. "Marcus Volk sends his regards." The line goes dead. I immediately call James, who confirms they were tracing the call but lost it. "Burner phone," he says. Probably already discarded. Sleep that night is fitful, full of half-dreams where Volk sits in the corner of my bedroom watching. I wake repeatedly, checking the camera's status lights, reassuring myself that I'm being watched by friendlier eyes than his. Morning comes, and with it, a strange new resolve. The fear is still there, but now it shares space with determination. If someone is coming for me, let them come. At least now I'm not facing them alone. I go to work as usual. Eleanor has arranged coverage at the bookstore, another detail in our elaborate charade of normalcy. I help customers, shelve books, take my lunch at the usual time, all while scanning faces, watching for anyone who watches me too closely. The day passes without incident, as does the next, and the next. Just when I start to wonder if our trap has scared off the enforcer, I come home to find a 4th stone on my pillow, red this time like dried blood or rust. It sits in the center of the white pillowcase, impossible to miss. A deliberate escalation. I call James immediately. He and his team check the footage, the alarms, the entry logs for my building. Nothing. No sign of forced entry, no stranger on the cameras. It's as if the stone materialized out of thin air. "They're good," James admits grudgingly. "Professional grade. They must have found a blind spot in our coverage. Or they have access we don't know about," Eleanor suggests. She's joined us in my apartment, her face tight with concern. "Either way, they're sending a message," I say, looking at the red stone. "They can still reach me, even with all this protection." James runs a hand through his thinning hair. "We need to change tactics. This passive approach isn't working." "What do you suggest?" Eleanor asks. "We need to be more direct. Draw them out into the open." He turns to me. "You need to let